Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Classroom Matters podcast with me, your host, Kristy Houle. And today I am sitting down and speaking with Dr. Jen Forristal. Now, she wears many, many hats. She is the CEO of the Umbrella Project, a naturopathic doctor with a primary focus in pediatric mental health, and the author of the book, The Umbrella Effect, Your Guide to Raising Strong, Adaptable Kids in a Stressful World. She has worked extensively with schools, researchers, and organizations developing mental wellness strategies for families facing social, emotional, and mental health challenges, and those looking for optimal health and performance. As the founder of the Umbrella Project, Dr. Jen trains medical professionals, educators, and parents to proactively assess and develop the skills needed to cope with life's inevitable challenges. In her private practice, she supports families in raising resilient, healthy children. Dr. Jen, thank you so much for being on the Classroom Matters podcast today.
I'm so excited to be here today.
Okay, so as we were, Dr. Jen and I were talking before we kind of did the intro, and I was telling her I'm so excited about this book. I've read this book through a couple of times. I went back to it a few times because it really is so important, and the things that you have in this book really hit me from. I mean, I read the intro, and then as soon as I got to that first principle, I was like, wow, I definitely am going to get something out of this book. So talk to us a little bit. Well, let's go back before we really dive into the book. And I want you to talk about the kind of work that you're doing, in addition to writing the book, and also how you sort of got to this point, what your journey was like to get here to all this work that you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, I would say it's hard for me to even compile my journey into a storyline, because I've had the really unique opportunity to work with mental health, and especially the development of this next generation of kids from so many different angles. As a naturopath, I was working with an organization in town that works with kids ages 5 to 12 who are really struggling with their mental health. In my private practice, I see families bringing their kids in. I was working with schools and speaking on mental health and doing research. And so I really feel like I got this interesting 360-degree view of what's happening with the mental health of our kids, and at the same time became a parent myself. And there's no better way to learn all of these things than, when the stakes are the highest with your own kids, and when the emotions are the highest too. So I think I just came to realize that there's some really fundamental things that we aren't doing for our kids that we should be. There's some truths in the research that we can all get behind if we want to help our kids develop all of the skills that they're going to need to cope with what is, unfortunately, a stressful world. And, I'd love for it to be easier than it is, but that's just not what exists for us, right? Mm-hmm. So instead of hoping or pretending that everything's going to be okay for our kids, I think there's a part of the journey, whether it's in schools or as parents, that we need to get really real about the fact that challenges are part of our kids' lives, and that they're pretty stressed out right now with all the things that they're seeing and dealing with. And so we need to respond to that in a way that's going to help them develop all the skills that they need. So I think the Umbrella project itself came out of needing a way to understand how all the pieces fit together so that we can have a clear picture of what our kids need, and we can move forward from there.
Yeah.
I know myself, when my kids were young, I really felt overwhelmed by information of what I could be doing to help them to be well. Maybe it was a gratitude journal, or they should be playing sports, or maybe they should be having more play dates or less play dates, or maybe they should be unstructured play outside, or maybe I need to be having more conversations about their feelings. It just felt like there was just a million things all the time that you could do. But how did it all fit together? And that's sort of where the Umbrella Project was born, a way for us to understand as parents what we need to be doing for each individual child to help them grow and develop the skills they're going to need to thrive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so you talk about things being really overwhelming, and I want to kind of go back to that point. As a parent and as an educator, you're always looking and trying to find things, ways, strategies, all this information is coming in, but how do you organize it? How do you know what to do with it? How do you sort of center it all? And I think that is something that you have done such a great job with. And that's what I really loved about reading this book, is that it's all right there for you, and when folks dive into your book, they're going to, see that there are surveys and there are questionnaires and there are even like question prompts for you, for your kids. And it makes it so much easier for you to really not only understand the umbrella effect and how to help our kids cope, but you've laid it all out in such a really nice way to not overwhelm the parent or the teacher. So talk about what, we've said this a couple of times now, the umbrella effect. Talk to our listeners about, what do you mean when you say the umbrella effect? What is that overarching idea of that?
Mm-hmm. So basically, the umbrella effect is the effect of having an umbrella of coping skills when life rains. And so it really comes back to the fundamental idea that you're not getting out of life without some challenges. Your child and you will 100% have rain in your life. That's a normal part of life. And it's not even a bad part of life, right? We know that positive stress is what allows us to build and develop coping skills. They're called skills for a reason, because they need to be practiced in order to be strong, right? They're skills. And so we have this inevitable challenge of the rain of life, as we call it. But you're not at the mercy of the weather in your life. You can develop a layer that is within your control in circumstances that are outside your control, that protect you and allow you to go out and take on life no matter what the weather is. So, and all of those skills, we've identified 18 different skills that are huge in the research that really influence whether or not you're going to be coping well with challenges. So this is where things like gratitude and empathy, kindness, cognitive flexibility, a growth mindset, a sense of purpose, we hear all these things in the world around us, but they actually all kind of centralize into this metaphorical umbrella. And the more pieces of it you have and the stronger it is, the more you can cope with challenges that are in your path. So if you think about like a golf umbrella, when it's sprinkling out, you're probably going to be pretty dry underneath that. And, likewise, if you have a cocktail umbrella and there's a monsoon, that's not going to do much for you to protect you from the rain. So we can really think about this. There's some great research out of Harvard that showed that really our coping and our well-being is really a ratio of like what's happening and how much we have to cope with it. Mm-hmm. So we can really start to think about our kids in this way and put all the pieces together into one visual to understand how our kids are doing.
And I love the visual so much, because ever since I read this book, I now in my mind am thinking of all these different sized umbrellas. And, my kids are all teenagers now, but, when they were little, they used to have these little bitty like character umbrellas. You remember those? And I know a lot of kids still have, and they're little, right? They're tiny. And even now, sometimes, I was thinking about this the other night. I was reading back through the book again, just because I wanted to. And I was thinking about my youngest son, and I thought, he's almost 13, but sometimes I feel like, using your analogy and these coping skills and the 10 principles, he sometimes is probably still carrying around that little Spider-Man umbrella, even though he's grown into a teenager. And so I love the visual that you put with this work, because you can think about it, and you do that throughout the book, right? You have all these different visuals of kids and umbrellas and parents with their umbrellas. And at one point you even talk about parents using their umbrellas to help, their put their umbrellas over their children's heads. And so I love that. And so you said you have 18 skills, but you also have 10 principles. Right.
Yeah.
And so the book is laid out with the 10 principles. And I had, told Dr. Jen this before we started recording. I literally started reading the book, and after the intro, I hit principle number 1. That was, accept that there is 100% chance of rain in your child's life. And I said, oh boy, this principle might be geared towards me, because I'm always wanting to keep my child from any type of disappointment or sadness or failure or pain or loss or any of those things, but you can't. So, Talk a little bit about the different principles and maybe go into a little bit about that first one.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the first one is the hardest one because it's the one that we all instantly nod our heads. Oh yeah, of course, my child's going to have challenges. That's true. And yet when it happens, we want so badly to make it not happen for them, right? Like I didn't realize before I became a parent how gut-wrenchingly hard it is to watch your kids struggle. And I think we're biologically wired to fix problems for our kids, right? To help them survive. But in the world the way it is now, it's actually counterproductive for us to be the people who solve all the problems for our kids because they need to learn how to solve those problems for themselves. And I feel trapped between, the really negative connotation of being a helicopter parent or a lawnmower parent or a Zamboni parent in Canada. We're hockey people here, so we got the Zamboni parent. And there is part of your job as a parent that is to protect your child from challenges. When they're very small, they don't have all the coping skills they need to deal with all of the challenges that might come along their path. Of course, you have your umbrella and you're supposed to be protecting your child from challenges. But as they get older and grow up, the goal is that we're slowly withdrawing our protection and we're allowing our kids to slowly build their own so that when they're old enough to leave our house and go off into their own lives, they know how to do that for themselves, right? They know how to protect themselves from challenges and they've had a chance to build the skills that they need. And so, when it comes to that principle of accepting that there will be 100% chance of rain in your child's life, I think it starts with a reframe of like, that's okay. And it's okay for you to help your child through challenges, but you need to be aware about how often you're helping and why, right? Are you helping your child because it's uncomfortable for you to see them struggle and it's much easier for you to just solve the problem? Or are you helping them because they genuinely need your help in that moment? Or is there another opportunity that exists for you to allow them to take on some challenges for themselves and start to build confidence in themselves, right? I think as parents, and I don't know how you feel, but for me, it feels good for me to solve problems for my kids, right? It feels good to be able to do that. And sometimes when we do it too much for our kids, we're robbing them of the chance of feeling like that, of solving a problem for themselves, of really building that inner sense of confidence that like, I've got this, I can handle this feeling, right? So there's two reasons that your kids are happy generally. One is because they're standing under their own umbrella of coping and they're handling challenges. And the second is that they're standing under yours and that you're handling challenges for them. So I often say like your child's happiness is not necessarily a great indicator of whether they're prepared for the life ahead of them. You need to step back a little bit and really ask yourself, like, is this me? Is this them? Are we at the right stage of protection or am I doing too much? Am I doing too little? Right? And I think the book itself, because we have an assessment tool that helps parents understand their own umbrellas and you can understand your child's umbrella, really helps to see and zoom out a bit and be like, okay, where are we at now? And wherever you're at is fine because you can build these skills forever, whether it's for you or your kids. There's no bad place to be. So don't be afraid to check this out. It's just a point of awareness to ask yourself, like, what's next?
I know that as you're reading through this book, it is, sort of leans towards parent-child relationship. But as I read this book, I really felt like the teacher in me as well, because, we have so many educators that really do care and nurture and love and support children in their classrooms as though they're their own. And, that transition from being that nurturing elementary school, primary school teacher into, the more of the middle school years, that's a hard transition for kids. And I think a lot of that is because as younger children and educators, we do tend to, sort of quote unquote helicopter or help them cope more than we should. So how does this sort of relate to the teacher-student relationship? And are these principles that can also be used in the classroom setting?
So we have a school curriculum that helps teachers to bring all of these skills to life for students. Because I think, thinking back to my own childhood and thinking back to, all of the teachers that I know and what they learned in teachers college and in their educations, we never really learned these things, right? You just kind of have the coping skills you have from whatever you had to cope with. Sometimes maybe you learned like one or two along the way, but I think we're all learning together a different way of coping and understanding ourselves and building all of these skills. So on the school side, the curriculum itself is designed for everybody to be learning together. You don't have to be an expert as a teacher in coping skills or in, the relationship with your students when it comes to coping skills, because it's pretty hard to learn it that way. Instead, what we try to layer in is helping everybody, teachers and students included, see these skills together and develop them and learn and hold space for the hard things, right? But understand what they might be building from those experiences. So even just reading the book and doing the umbrella assessment for yourself and understanding your own coping skills as an educator allows you to start to build the skills that are required to be a teacher who's taking care of themselves and their students, right? I often say like a perfect community looks like everybody has their own umbrella and everybody gets to take a turn being the one who needs a little bit more help and support from the community. And then, when that time has passed, they can open back up their umbrella and become somebody who's helping the community, because these are relationship skills, right? Empathy, kindness. Have you ever tried to be in a relationship with somebody who has zero cognitive flexibility, where like something changes and they just cannot cope with the changing circumstances, right? Or somebody who has really horrible self-compassion and just beats themselves up every single time something goes wrong. When we have these skills, we become better in relationship with other people too, because they're the skills that are protecting us and allowing us to be in good relationships. So I think from an education standpoint, there's so many applications just for teachers themselves right now who are all struggling to cope, I think, with what's happening in their classrooms, all the way down to the relationship with their students and how that transfers to their students' development too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm so glad that you mentioned that assessment for teachers and parents, because as I started reading the book through the first time, I got to principle 1 and I was like, oh gosh, I probably need some work myself. And then I got to principle 2 and I was like, yes, I definitely need. I'm like, I need to do this for myself. And so I was really happy to see that towards the end of the book, you really specifically talked to parents, educators about our coping skills as an adult, because everyone had a different upbringing. Everyone had a different childhood. And, maybe I wasn't taught coping skills as a child, or had a parent that didn't know how to help me with my coping umbrella. So I don't even know what I don't know as an adult. And so, right. When I went back the second time, I was like, okay, now I need to go through and figure my business out first, and then what my strengths and weaknesses are to help my kids or students that I come into contact with throughout my work, helping other educators. And so everybody that's listening, whether you're a parent, homeschool mom, teacher, really dive into that self-assessment of your own coping skills, and really take a deep look at that. I think that it really, really helped me when I had that to fall back on. So I love that about this book. Something I want to go back to, because you talked about the classroom setting, things happening in the classroom. And there was a story in the book that I really appreciated about a little kiddo named Frankie, who was really, really struggling with the creative writing time of the classroom. And everybody was so noisy, and they were trying to figure out a way to diminish that noise for him so he could work. So can you share a little bit about that story of Frankie and how they were able to sort of help him not only with the problem, but to learn how to cope every day?
Yeah. I mean, I shared that story because, first of all, it was such a lovely family and they were such a joy to work with. But I think it does really highlight how we can maybe go a bit wrong when we're trying to problem solve for kids. So the example that you're sharing, it was a little a little kid who would absolutely refuse to do creative writing in class and hadn't previously struggled very much with anxiety in his life. But this grade 3 year specifically, that's why they brought him into my office, is he was so anxious. He was at the point where he didn't want to go to school. And it was a really big deal for this family because he was previously seemed to be doing just fine. So, and the problem essentially was that he thought the classroom was too noisy. And so for the hardest subject for him, which was creative writing, he just would not put pen to paper. He couldn't do it. And he was, that was a real struggle for him. And the teacher was having a very hard time. So they were trying to get a desk put out in the hallway for him for creative writing time so that the world was a bit quieter so he could think and execute on his creative writing, which probably, when you think about like the ratio of rain to umbrella in his life, would that have decreased some of the rain in his life so maybe he could cope a bit better and do his creative writing? Absolutely. And the outcome of that would have been that maybe he would have gotten a better mark in creative writing and they would have moved on. However, the lasting effect of that decision is that he would have learned also that when things are noisy, when the world is raining for him, you need to eliminate that rain in order to thrive. And so as we were talking about, this solution and the desk in the hallway, I said, I think we should stop for a second and just think about what we're doing here, because are we solving a problem for him? And is he, the next time in grade 4, when he's really noisy again, and are we helping him to be better at dealing with that challenge the next time? Or the next time, is he going to need a desk in the hallway too? What if that teacher says, no, we're not going to do that, right? How are we helping him have the skills to deal with this challenge? So I said, instead, before we go to the desk thing, before we eliminate this raindrop for him, what if we looked at what coping skill we could build for him and help him have some, control over his life? So the mom ended up taking him out to a noisy coffee shop a couple times a week to work on schoolwork, and to learn the skill of working in that kind of noisy environment, to build his confidence in his autonomy and his ability to take on the challenge and still work in that space. So after a couple weeks, he was doing creative writing in class in the noisy environment. They made it a bit fun in order to show him that he could overcome that specific challenge and build on his own coping skills and how to work in that space so that next time he's better prepared. And I think that's always a great decision matrix to come back to. Will the thing that I'm doing right now for my child make them more prepared next time they face this challenge? Or am I eliminating the raindrop for them in their life, but not actually giving them any tools to deal with it for the next time? Mm-hmm. So I think I see it happen all the time with like friends, conflict with friends, or as soon as we go in and we try to eliminate that, maybe we try to switch our kid to a different class because they don't like one of the kids in their class, right? But are they better prepared the next time a kid comes along that they don't get along with? Because that's going to happen 100 times in their life, right? It's not a problem that's a one-off. It's a continuous trickle of challenges. And so we need to think about the interventions that are going to make them better and more prepared the next time and the next time, the next time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that point, and I think one of the reasons that particular story, I mean, there's so many great examples in this book, but that really resonated because it's really how you think about helping the student cope with that obstacle. And I had really never thought about it. I'm just as guilty as the next person that just completely tries to take away whatever is in the way, right? Taking the obstacle away. And, for my younger son, it kind of brings me back to him because he's autistic and two noises really, really, really bothered him: dogs barking loudly and toilets flushing. And at the time we would try to get him to a situation where he didn't have to hear those sounds, right? We would flush the toilet for him after he left the bathroom, or we would, he would run inside whenever he heard the dogs barking next door, and we would try to protect him. But then after a while, that sort of thought came to us as well. And we were like, okay, he's never going to live in a world without toilets flushing. So we had to gradually introduce those sounds to him so that he could get past that. But I absolutely, it's just so wonderful the way that you put these examples for parents and teachers to really think about how they are building their children's coping skills and their umbrellas in a world that is not always going to be, willing to take those obstacles away from them. And so that kind of gets me into principle 7, which I really wanted you to touch base on, because I think that this is really an important principle in the book, the building an appetite for obstacles, because you talk a lot about in this, and another professional in this principle talked about risky play, and appropriate risky behavior, and like what is okay versus what is not. So talk a little bit about that one.
So, I mean, I love this one because I feel like a lot of what kids have to cope with when it comes to challenges are challenges. Like they're the hard things, right? They're a friend being mean, they're a teacher that they don't like, or a subject that's hard. And while those are also very, very important, risky play is the one space that I feel like is fun and it's taking on challenges, right? Like it's an area for parents to really think about allowing their kids to explore a little bit and build coping skills while they're doing it, right? When we come back to principle 7 and the idea that like that challenge mindset is so important, it really is. Our world is not getting more linear. We used to be able to maybe train a job for our children that they would follow these clear steps and it was just a clear path to what they were going to do. And the world's less and less and less like that. So more and more of our kids are going to need to be able to take on challenges in order to succeed in whatever they want to do. So risky play is a great space for parents to play. So risky play is basically play with things where there is a risk. And so one of the risks that the experts talk about is the risk of getting lost, for example, the risk of being at heights or playing with tools and fire or speed, right? These are all things that as parents, our gut reaction is to be like, get down from there, slow down. Absolutely no, do not leave my eyesight. I need to know where you are and I need to know that you're safe, right? However, when we allow our kids to explore a little bit beyond the boundaries of what we feel safe, it's pushing outside their comfort zone and it's building coping skills and it's building our confidence. So one of the ways that we can really think about this is that we're testing the lines together. I want to be confident that my kids know what to do when they're, playing in the woods, or that they know when to stop when they're climbing a tree, and that they can regulate their own risk and safety. And my kids want to know that they can explore and expand their boundaries. So I love, and I can't remember who started this, but the 17-second rule is a rule that comes up in the risky play space, where when you are about to say, stop, get down, if you're watching, let's give an example of like you're watching your child climb a tree and you're at some point, your gut parenting instinct is to be like, stop, that's too high, come down from there. You count to 17 in your head, provided your child's not like at risk of death or something, right? In your head, and you just watch them and you see what they do. Because usually somewhere between where we want to say stop and where there's a huge risk to their health or well-being is their own stopping point, right? So often in that 17 seconds, your kids will stop themselves, right? And we learn, okay, as a parent, I just built a little bit of confidence. I learned where my child's threshold was and they stopped themselves. And your child got to do that fun, risky, exploring thing, right? So it's good to take a step back and again, ask like, is this about me or is this about my kids? Is this my parenting anxiety? Or is this, is this about my child being safe?
Yeah. And don't you think that's changed? Because I mean, I might be a little bit older than you, but my husband and I will talk all the time about when we were kids, in the 80s, how it seemed like, I don't know. I had wonderful parents, but I'm like, I don't think they were as concerned. My husband will say, oh, I rode my bike from, here to, for 7 miles to the pool every day, and didn't come home until the street lights came on, and we didn't have, cell phones for our parents to be checking on us as teenagers, and we were just kind of having risky behavior as kids all the time. My
Yeah.
older brother and I used to go play in the creek all the time, and I don't even know if we told our parents what we were doing. And so
Yeah.
I think it's like we've come to a time in life where, and I don't know, maybe it's just because we think that way because now we're parents, or we really truly are a little bit more protective than what our parents used to be of us.
I think we all have way more information
Hmm.
than we used to have. And so as parents, the amount of information is scary, right? We might hear about the 1 in a million case of a child getting kidnapped on the way to school, and that triggers us to think it's not safe to walk to school. And so the way that our media and the way that information flows now has definitely made, I think, parents much more worried about their kids' safety. But that's a great example. So, walking to school versus driving your child, there is a significantly higher risk to your child the second you put them in a car
Hmm.
and drive them to school than there is from them walking to school in most neighborhoods, in like 99% of neighborhoods in, North America. However, we feel a false sense of security as parents putting our kids in the
Hmm.
car and driving them to school because we can see what's happening, right? We're in control. But when you think about that control element again, and with risky play, you can't build autonomy and your own sense of being in control of the direction of your life if your parents are always controlling your environment like that. So that's a way that we talk about building risky play is just literally walking to school these days, right? Maybe you start with your child and you walk with them for a while and you ask them, okay, what are you going to do at this cross street? Right? Or you just watch them. Do they know how to cross the street well? Do they know what to do if a dog comes running out of a house? Do they know what if a stranger talks to them? What do they do? Right? And then after a couple of times, you start to let them maybe explore that on their own and walk to school with a couple neighbor kids. And then eventually you both build the confidence that they can walk to school on their own. They build that autonomy piece of getting there themselves, and you build the confidence that they know what they're doing,
Yeah.
right? And risky play is like that on all elements. You slowly build confidence together.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think that's so important for parents to really think about as they're reading through all of these coping skills and all of the principles. It's okay to let go a little bit, as
Mhm.
long as your child is not in, like you said, like at the brink of death or something. There's only so far you want to go with that. So I want to wrap this up because we've talked a lot about the umbrella effect and the 18 coping skills, or the umbrella skills, the 10 principles. I want to hit a little bit on what parents and educators should look for with inappropriate or damaging coping skills that they might be seeing, children doing. Like, what are some of those damaging or inappropriate coping skills that potentially children might be using, for us to look for?
Yeah. And, I think this comes back to understanding that most of us won't just stand out in the rain and get soaked. We'll do something, right? So if you don't have the positive coping skills that you need to cope with challenges, you'll often put something else in place, whatever it is, to try to, block that feeling of being overwhelmed by things you can't control. So, a prime example, bullying. I think kids who generally do bullying behavior are using that as a coping skill because they potentially lack some of the other skills that would make them feel calm and confident in themselves, right? So instead, they're using a behavior like that. So that's one. Um, Anxiety. If you are worried every time a little cloud pops up in the sky or there's a challenge, it's likely that you don't feel confident in the coping skills that you have to deal with the challenges
Yeah.
in front of you. Um, there's so many different behaviors, but like issues when you notice your child change, right? They're not sleeping as well anymore, maybe, or they don't seem as happy. Their emotions are more volatile. suddenly they seem a lot angrier about
Mm-hmm.
little things than they used to. Those are all indications that maybe your child's coping skills are, being challenged more than what they have available to them to use.
Yeah.
Sometimes your child seems to cope just
Mm-hmm.
fine with a friend who says something mean, and other times it's like the last straw for them, right? You can almost watch it happen when their umbrella of coping skills just gets overwhelmed with the amount of things they have to cope with. And that's why it's so important to know that, is because you can't even deal with the same situation the same way each time with your child, because one time they might be able to handle it super no problem, and the next time they might just be overwhelmed, and that might be something that you do need to help them a little more with. So it's a bit of a dance, a parenting dance, but so important to notice those things in your child so that you can intervene and help them, to build the skills they need.
Yeah. And that's, so what I was going to say was, I really love that about the book too, is you also talk a little bit in the book about sleep and diet and screen time and all of these, precipitating factors that are coming into our children's lives, and how, I also love the sections on how to question your kids and constantly ask them questions, and not only to talk to them and ask them questions, but you actually give us the questions to ask, which I find really great. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to write some of these on my hand so that when I'm driving my son home from practice, I could just kind of look down and be like, oh, here's a good question. Because you do kind of get into, you have children, I have children. Most people listening to this either have their own children or are in schools with children a lot. They're not big talkers when they reach a certain age, right? It's like fourth to fifth grade up to probably my oldest son, who's now graduated high school. I mean, he didn't really come back around and start having really good conversations with me until he was probably a senior. So you have that period of time with these children where they really are keeping a lot inside, and you have to pull it out of them. And so I love the fact that your book gives us the tools to be able to do that. And we don't have to just sit and try to think of that, ourselves as parents. So, Dr. Jen, I cannot say enough about the Umbrella Effect book, the Umbrella project. So let our listeners know where they can come and find you and contact you and get more information about this.
Yeah, of course. So the easiest spot to learn more about the Umbrella Project is at our website, umbrellaproject.co. There you can find the book, you can find information about the school curriculum and all the different things that we do. We're also pretty active on Instagram, Umbrella PJCT. And there I try to share some more personal elements from my life, some parenting tips, some stuff about my own family and the things that I'm finding are really working well for me. And just try to, that's a relatable spot where we're all just parenting together. I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from the book is like, we are stronger together. We need to all do this together. The more kids who know about this, who are coping well, the more likely it is that your child's going to be surrounded with people who are coping, who can support them and become that strong community. So Instagram's where I try to really foster a little bit more of that. So
yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate this conversation. Like I said, I think this is just such a brilliant book for parents and teachers to have. And so I really appreciate you coming on the show, talking to us, and kind of really diving in to some of these principles and these ideas. I know there's going to be a lot of people that are listening that, were sort of really shaking their head throughout the whole conversation and are interested in learning more. So thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
And this is Kristy Houle signing out for this episode of the Classroom Matters podcast. And just like always, we will have all of Dr. Jen's information and website info, Instagram info in the description below on our description page at educate.today.